My presentation is Deliverance from the Power of Evil. Several well-known African scholars opine that salvation for the African must transcend mere propositional concepts or theological constructs to embrace deliverance from the powers of evil. And they should affect the total dimensions of the human existence. The African quest for shalom, to the Yoruba, Alafia, to the Igbos, Ezindu, entails a long, and I quote, a long life, good health, material prosperity, communal harmony, but it also includes overcoming the powers of evil. In other words, when we preach about salvation, let's understand that the audience we're preaching to are expecting more than just theology or propositional truth, but they want to see the real practical benefits. And one area is in the area of deliverance from evil. For the traditional African, the consciousness of the spirit realm is more real than the physical. Africans live in the recognition that the cosmos is populated not merely with humans and nature, but with unseen yet powerful ancestors who are often referred to as the living dead and also the yet unborn. So in the African cosmos, it's not just the persons that you see, not the natural world alone, but even the ancestors interrelate with us. And another dimension, the yet unborn. Kind of reminds me of a place where a young man had an accident, hit a young girl, and he was told, listen, this young girl would have had children. She'd have been married and had children. So you will not only take care of the fact that she should have been married, but that she will have children. So he had to pay for a wedding gown because she would have married. And he had to give gifts because of the children she would have had. So in those areas you don't have an accident, that'll cost. Jim Harris tells us, the unseen spirit world also comprised of divinities and other spirits, many of which are malevolent. Jim Harris, a missionary who served many years in Kenya, observed, and I quote, a widespread and commonplace perception of evil forces that dominates everyday life. And what does he give us the evidence for the fact that there's a predominant concern for evil? He cites, he says, this practice was seen in the constant, you always see constant casting out of demons or evil spirits, the prevalence of sacrifices, especially animal sacrifices to ward off evil, but also in the significance of funeral attendance, which he regards as rituals designed to cleanse from the evil associated with them. Another insight he provides in this rampant and powerful belief is the breaking of taboos, which brings evil in many guises. Unfortunately, early Christian missions failed to acknowledge and respond to the perceptions and assumptions regarding the spirit world of Africans. As a result, converts retained their fears of witches and evil spirits and continued the practice of reverence to ancestors. Meanwhile, these were labeled by the missionaries as superstitious, as local myths. The result of this is what has been described by missiologist Paul Hiebert as split-level Christianity. Notice what Dr. Sanu was talking about. On the part of the Africans, the spirit world was considered as responsible for illness, for misfortune, for poverty, for lack of prosperity, for failure, and even for death. Therefore, for Christianity to be meaningful and fulfilling to the African, it shall have to comprehensively respond to deliverance to the power of evil. Since evil is believed to originate from various forms such as curses, witches, ancestors, evil eye, enemies, the freedom of the gospel brings must also prevail over these outlying areas. And so let's look at these areas one after the other, beginning with curses. Curses reveal the belief that words spoken by persons of power have significant effects on the life, on the well-being, on the destiny of a person. And that is why we always use this illustration. The African is told, you will see. He goes to lodge a case with the police. Just in case anything happens to me, this is the person who said, I will see. Such a belief is prevalent in many religions and regions of the world, that is, believing curses, but especially in Africa. Usually such words are uttered with the intent of causing harm to another, relying on a mystical supernatural power to effect its occurrence. Curses may originate from the violation of oaths, of taboos, or may be instigated by envy or jealousy over the success of another. For many, curses are believed to be the reasons why some persons grow ill, are barren, experience failure in life, or the members of a cursed person may die young, or could be plagued by particular misfortune or even insanity. So, whenever something is wrong, they want to ask, is the person under a curse? Is that why he's behaving or acting in that manner? Next one is witchcraft. Witchcraft. The belief in the ability of witches to cause evil is widespread in Africa. In a paper I presented a couple of years ago with Dr. Bubakar on witchcraft and its prevalence in the continent, I shared statistics from Central African Republic where 1 out of every 4 cases in the capital, in the court in Bangui, involve witchcraft accusations. 80 to 90% of the cases in rural courts, witchcraft accusation. 70% of the prisoners in the prison are there because of witchcraft. Witchcraft can be defined as the ability to harm someone through the use of mystical power. It is a phenomenon which in recent years has regained new significance and attention. Indeed, at that conference, I sought to show that there's a resurgence in the belief in witchcraft. Some studies show that the emergence of Pentecostalism has led to increased witchcraft accusations. That's another paper. As opposed to evil spirits that are external forces which gain access to persons involuntarily, witchcraft powers represent a type of evil that is considered to be inherent, voluntary, and permanent. Witchcraft is one of the most dreaded causes of evil, evoking the most passionate antipathy in the hearts and the minds of Africans. Witchcraft accusations among certain tribes in Africa end up in the suspected witches getting burned to death. Depending on the region, the activities of the witches could range from inducing debilitating diseases, barrenness, impotence, death, and sometimes one of the ways they deal with witches is to ostracize them from the community, ban them from ever having any dealing with any member of that community. Curiously, those suspected to be engaged in witchcraft include the childless widows, orphans, basically those who are supposed to be protected by society.
Yes.
Missiologists or priests engaged in a study over a few years around parts of Africa, engaging missiologists in Africa. And he before he came out with the conclusion of his study, he observed that strangely, witchcraft accusations are found largely among Christians and not among Muslims.
Yep.
Another conclusion he observed was that those who are accused of witchcraft are those who the Bible says we ought to protect: the widows, the orphans, and those who are the outcasts in society, ancestors. In the African cosmology, perhaps the most significant elements are the ancestors. These ancestors, also referred to by African scholars, as Bubakar mentioned, John Mnimbiti, as the living dead. They play a very crucial function in the well-being, in the fortunes, and in the lives of Africans. Among the observed functions of the ancestors are companions. They are served as companions to the living. They are mediators between the descendants and the divinities. And they are also the custodians of family morals and values. So ancestors are very important. That is why I'll be going home for my father's burial. And I have to wait a number of months. We're going to transfer him to the realm of the ancestors. Ancestors are believed to be vested with mythical powers and authority. And for this reason, all is done to appease, to placate, to revere them, so that it will be well with their living relatives. Whenever the living fail to acknowledge the importance of these ancestors to the living, disasters may strike. A young lady in my class many years ago explained to me that if she failed to take along her fiancé to the graveside of her dead grandmother to introduce him. She may become afflicted with barrenness, continually have stillbirths, or even die during pregnancy. As Jacques Bretain explains, so significant are ancestors to the traditional African society that, and I quote, to be cut off from relationships with one's ancestors is to cease to be a whole person.
Yeah.
Not to regard your ancestors, to give them the reverence that they demand, means that you've been cut off from that community. Generally, angry ancestors are believed to be the culprits for natural and personal disasters. For this reason, the living relatives must continually feed, entertain, and recognize their dead ancestors in order to forestall any kind of evil or misfortune. Now, evil eye. Another phenomenon that causes trepidation to the hearts of Africans is the evil eye. This is a situation where some persons are believed to possess uncanny powers to cause evil simply by looking in the direction of the intended victim. Particularly vulnerable are pregnant women, nursing mothers, children, and intended or freshly made bride and groom. It is even believed that a woman could lose her pregnancy as a result of the evil eye, while susceptible children could die due to this practice. Those who possess such abilities are persons of power who are motivated by envy, by jealousy, by hatred or evil, and they seek to bring misfortune or evil to innocent persons. David Bernard cites a couple of Arab proverbs I'd like to share with you to illustrate the powerful belief in the evil eye. He says, and I quote the first one, "One half of mankind die from the evil eye." And the other proverb says, "The evil eye owns 2/3 of the graveyard." And our enemies. Africans generally do not believe that evil or misfortune may occur as a result of chance, luck, coincidence, or some other explicable natural cause. Usually, there's a supernatural explanation for evil, and a human agent is behind the incident. We share the story, widely told, of a tribesman who was affected by malaria. And the missionary was trying to explain that this is caused by malaria. And the malaria was brought by a mosquito. And he said, okay, and who sent the mosquito? Who sent the mosquito? There's always a human agent. Usually there's a supernatural explanation for evil and a human agent behind the incidents. This person is often referred to as the enemy. Enemies may be envious family members or relatives. They could be colleagues, neighbors, or even a disgruntled spouse. Hardly is there a tribe which does not have a proverb to underscore the significance of enemies in the worldview. Many years ago, while doing my PhD study, I came across an article, actually a chapter in the book, Ota in the belief system of the Yoruba. And the author was trying to show how the concept of the Ota is strong in the Yoruba belief system. And even though we don't realize it, it has infiltrated Pentecostalism in Nigeria and is infiltrating Pentecostalism across the continent, which is why you invite a popular preacher to pray. He's praying, your enemies shall not see, your enemies shall not see, rejoice over you. Your enemies shall not see their desires over you. Your enemies, your enemies, your enemies. Because the concept of the enemy resides strongly in the belief system of the people. And the proverb from Yoruba, southwestern Nigeria says, only the dead man has no enemies. Only the dead man has no enemies. So be aware that you have enemies. And they could be sitting in front of you. That's in the case of witchcraft, evil eye, and some other sources of evil. Envy is a dominant motive behind the evil caused by enemies. A person's enemies may collude with sorcerers or may purchase charms to induce evil or poison to cause illness or sickness or even death. Now, freedom from evil. If the African believer is to be delivered from the fear of evil, this would of necessity entail a transformation of the worldview. Believers would need to experience the power of the gospel. Thank you, Elder Corrali, for setting the tone. Experience the power of the gospel to bring freedom from each one of the factors that bring about evil. Missiologist Charles Kraft advocated the need, and Dr. Sanu has already mentioned this, for the three encounters in the three dimensions of experience of the Christian in order to bring about wholeness. Three encounters has to be considered fundamental if we must bring about conversion and wholeness, the shalom that the people need. The three encounters are basically the allegiance or commitment encounter, which he says leads to relationship, the truth or the knowledge encounter, which leads to understanding, and then the power and the spiritual encounter, which leads to freedom. So let's see how these are applied now to deal with those sources or causes of evil. A truth or knowledge encounter would be invaluable to lead to freedom from the fear of evil. For instance, the Bible demonstrates the power of God, stating, "For the weapons of our warfare are not human weapons, but are made powerful by God for tearing down strongholds. We tear down arguments and every arrogant obstacle that is raised up against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to make it obey Christ." In other words, we've got to go down to the level of the worldview. That is where the transformation must take place. And that's what Paul acknowledges here in this passage, that it goes down to the thoughts and the imaginations where these issues are formed. That is where the strongholds are, and that is where it must be broken. A powerful illustration of the security and safety believers find in Christ is evident in the narrative featuring Balaam and the Israelite nation. I love to explain and expound on this passage in the African context. After trying several times to place a curse on the people of God, Balaam reluctantly was forced to testify that he could not curse those whom God had blessed. I love to preach a sermon. I'll probably be preaching it this Sabbath. Too blessed to be stressed. You're wasting your time. We're blessed. And so against the curses, against the forces of evil, against witchcraft, you're too blessed to be stressed. Witchcraft. Against the fear of witchcraft, the account of Balaam with the Israelites is also significant. Numbers chapter 23. So also is the statement from the devil regarding Job. The devil gave a testimony. Listen to what he says. Quoting from Job chapter 1 verse 9. So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, around all that he has on every side?" And what is the significance of that? The significance for those who live in fear of witchcraft is that God has a protection, a defense around his home. And this is very crucial for many of us in Africa who hear reports about people who say, "At night I was scratched." I often ask them, where did they pass to come and scratch you? Were the angels of God asleep? Or were they absent? If they really were there, how did you get affected? Because the Lord has placed a hedge around us, those he loves, the enemy can do no harm to them. Also very comforting and assuring are the promises of God's protection and his watch care over his people. His angels are always there to protect his people, Psalm 34 verse 7. And he gives his angels charge over his people, Psalm 91 verse 11. Furthermore, no matter the nature of the forces of evil, Christ is Lord. Thank you, Elder Corrali. Christ is Lord over every principality, over every power. Therefore, they are powerless over his own. Indeed, at the cross, all the hierarchies of evil forces were disarmed, they were disabled, they were rendered redundant. Evil eye. Against the fear of the evil eye, the Bible declares that the eyes of the Lord run over the world, and he shows himself strong for his people. So rather than live in fear of the evil eye, recognize that the eyes of the Lord are watching over his own. The psalmist further states that the eyes of the Lord are upon those who fear him and acts in their behalf. Psalm 33:18, 34 verse 15. In other words, because the eyes of the Lord watch over his own, no evil can be served them. Present the scriptural truths to people entrapped by the fear of evil. Reading the passages in their hearing and expounding on their significance to their context leads to hope, comfort, peace, and freedom. The entrance of God's word will bring light and freedom to those living in darkness and bondage. Leading African believers into a truth encounter will enable them to have a better understanding of God's love, His power, His goodness, and also provide liberation from the predominant psyche of evil in which many abound. Now, the allegiance encounter. In animistic context, Galen Van Reenen observes, it is all about allegiances. The powers one is allied to are what provide protection, security, and blessings. Missionaries need to understand two important disciple-making factors in the African context. First, no convert emerges from a spiritual vacuum. That is, before coming to faith in Christ, everyone had commitments, connections, and allegiances that controlled their lives. Second, if old allegiances are not broken and new commitment engaged, the result will be that of incomplete conversion, a state described by Paul Hibbert as split-level Christianity. Both the Old and the New Testament demonstrate God's call for total surrender of the allegiance and the blessings and the privilege that accrue to His people as a result. Realizing, therefore, that in their pre-Christian lives, converts may have established allegiance with evil powers and therefore have footholds or strongholds of Satan in their hearts, this issue needs to be addressed. They must be led to totally renounce old allegiances and have a complete break with the connections of the past. Then should follow clear explanations of the importance of a new covenant relationship with Christ. Because symbols and rituals play a significant place in animistic context, it would be beneficial if this new allegiance the converts are entering into is done with appropriate Christian rituals that are filled with deep meaning and significance to have a lasting impression on new believers. In my class in contextualized discipleship, I said, how do persons become Adventists? Bring them up before the church and we tell them the answer to the question, isn't it? Say yes or raise your hand. And so they say yes and they raise their hand, and after that, strongholds still remain untouched. They need to be led into a new covenant relationship with Christ, and the significance of a covenant needs to be explained to them. New covenant relationship with Christ, where the new believers need to be taught that every evil power and hold over their lives have therefore been broken, because every curse has been removed because of what Christ did on the cross, and that they have come under new management with God as their King. Also, the new believers need to be taught that so long as they maintain total allegiance to Christ, they are free from the power of evil, because Christ watches over them. Now, power encounter. Missionaries and missiologists serving in animistic context all acknowledge the significance of power encounters in the experience of converts from such backgrounds. These demonstrations, power encounters, are simply demonstrations of the supremacy of God over the local power forces, tends to lead to a reappraisal of allegiance and a decision to be allied to new, more powerful deity. The study of Christianity in Africa shows that many persons were Sangomas, Babalawos, Muganga, Nyanga, all of them, many of them experienced conversion when they saw a power greater than theirs. They were brought to conversion. Until the convert can discover the inadequacy of the previous worship system and its old commitments, the temptation to revert to the old ways will always remain. We have a work to do to show them the supremacy of the new faith that they have. Otherwise, they'll be going back and getting into dual allegiance. In cases where possession by evil spirits or demons have occurred, it would be expedient that these should be expelled in biblically appropriate ways. Again, thank you, Dr. Corrali. And that is why we're furnishing every bag the book dealing with the demonic. Please don't just take it home and put it on the bookshelf. Start reading it right from now. Start reading it and see how you can apply those principles in your ministry and teach your members about them. Because exorcism is widely practiced today in different syncretistic and unbiblical manners, it is necessary that adequate care, caution, and prayer be employed in this process. I was conducting a Bible conference, ministerial conference recently, And one of the pastors said, thank you for your presentation. You see, I went with a group of Adventist pastors, and we went to cast out the spirit from this young girl. And my colleague said, you know, I have to put the Bible on certain parts of the female anatomy. And he said, why? And they looked at him strangely. Don't you know that the devil concentrates on certain parts of the anatomy more than others? Besides the necessity of requesting, if they are tokens of allegiances with the spirit world, too often we're quick to baptize them. 100,000, where are they coming from? They're not coming from a vacuum. Some of them have tokens, connections, allegiances, commitment to the spirit world. We need to ask whether they're tokens of such allegiances with the spirit world. And if they're possessed, they need to be destroyed. The person involved who has made that commitment should be able to do that. And if the person cannot, you and I have a duty to assist in them to destroying those tokens. While it may be true that power encounters do not lead to the conversion of people, for example, Pharaoh, examples of persons who power encounters did not change are Pharaoh and Jezebel. Nevertheless, they do serve as an affirmation of the supremacy of the God of heaven. Although discourse about the presence and the power of evil is a prevalent part of the contemporary African narrative. In other words, you hear about evil every day on the news, in the vehicle, wherever you go. Although this is a part of the discourse in the African narrative, this paper posits that it is possible to change this narrative. Unfortunately today, while stories describing the exploits of the powers of evil abound, there is a dearth of sermons from pulpits that respond to such fears. Deliverance from the power of evil must not only have a practical dimension, such as deliverance sessions from the control of evil spirits, but it must also respond to the fears of those powers that are residual in the minds of many, including ministers themselves. Even ministers are afraid. Pastor Gregor Mbaya is here, was about to go conduct a session and invited 4 of his colleagues. Only one showed up. The other ones became unavoidably absent. So, in order to respond heuristically to these fears, it would be beneficial to employ carefully chosen sermons and testimony sessions. I've often asked my students to do an audit of the sermons that they have preached in the last 6 months or a year, in order to determine the relevance of the subjects that they have preached upon. So, the sermons you preached in the last 6 months, try and write them out. And what were the subjects? And how relevant are they to where your people are? When contrasted against the stories circulating about the powers of evil, they usually come up short. If the fear of evil, which so dominates the psyche of the Africans from animistic backgrounds, is to be transformed, something needs to be done from the pulpits of the churches across the continent. That there is an ongoing conflict between good and evil, God and Satan, is evident throughout Scripture. As in this battle, God always comes out triumphant. This needs to be proclaimed stridently, more stridently from the pulpits by men of God, so that members know that they are on the winning team. Experts in communication and worldview transformation explain that stories play critical roles not only in shaping but transforming worldviews. In other words, if the majority of the stories the average member hears are regarding the prevalence of evil powers on a weekly basis, far outweighs in quantity and quality the narratives that display God's sovereignty and preeminence over the domain of evil, then there will be the possibility of gravitating in the direction of fear rather than faith. In other words, what is the dominance of the stories you hear? About the witch that was flying at night and had crash landing, about this person who did this and killed this. If those are the narratives you're hearing every day of the week, and yet you never hear sermons even on the Sabbath, then fear is created in the minds of the people rather than faith. What is more, when such persons find themselves in critical, life-threatening dilemmas, the default mode for them will be to seek the assistance of the local shaman or diviners or even the Pentecostal church to resolve the problems rather than turn to God or seek help from the pastors. Another significant element often overlooked in the form is the form of the message that is preached from our pulpits. Again, Dr. Corralius mentioned that. Our sermons from pulpits become more theological, philosophical, propositional in nature, the more irrelevant they become in the existential lives of the members. A young man in the seminary in the bathroom, I don't know whether Dr. Obama remembers this, in the seminary in the bathroom where we were one morning, practicing the first sermon that he would preach to his new congregation, loudly declared, "The title of my sermon today is Eschatology." If his first church was like the one I pastored, where I could not preach using multi-syllabic words, I couldn't use anything more than 2 syllables. If you tried saying things like sanctification, justification, how many? Sanctification, 5 syllables. They were lost. So if he had that kind of church, you can imagine his effectiveness in ministry to his members' needs. Yet it would appear more often more often these days, preachers seem to want to impress congregants with the knowledge of biblical languages. I need to move on fast now. I need to move on fast here. And their exegetical abilities, their oratorical skills as motivational speakers. If change must occur and worldviews become transformed and members delivered from the fear of the power of evil to faith in God, then the style of our sermon delivery needs to be altered. When Jesus, the greatest theologian that walked upon the face of the earth, Jesus, the greatest theologian that ever walked upon the face of the earth, when he walked on this earth, what did he do? He is the one who had just come from heaven. It is instructive to note that he did this when he taught theology. He did it not in esoteric languages, unfamiliar to the people. Should I continue?
Yeah.
Not in philosophical construct they could not comprehend, but in diction and forms they could easily relate, and even children and the unlearned could understand, could relate, and could remember. Perhaps our seminaries need to help correct this scenario.
Yes.
A Duke University survey I came across many years ago noticed a high dropout rate among North American pastors. And it revealed that the primary reason cited was the discovery, when they began pastoring, of the irrelevance of much of what they were taught in the seminary in preparing them for success in ministry. Yes. More than 50% of them dropped out within the first 5 years. Testimonies reveal God at work in real time. Yes, they serve to demonstrate that the God of the past is still the God of the present and can be trusted with the future. Yes. They remind the audience that God is alive, God is aware, and God is active in the lives of his people today. The more testimonies people hear today, the greater would grow their faith in God's presence in their daily lives and God's power to deliver them in times of trouble and from evil. Another often neglected element in Christian preaching and teaching is the agency and availability of angels in the battle against evil. As briefly mentioned earlier in the paper, more prominence should be given to the invisible presence and working of angels in the lives of the saints, those in a covenant relationship with Christ. The Bible clearly reveals that Christians ought not to be afraid of evil, for, and I quote, those who are with us are more than those who are with them. 2 Kings 6:16. And also that they are overcomers because, and I quote, he who is in you is greater than he that is in the world. In other words, to sum up, in the battle against evil, Christians have God's army of angels on their side, and they are more and they are mightier than all the forces of evil put together, demonic or human. As a result, more study needs to be conducted on the ministries and the roles of angels in the salvation of God's people. More sermons ought to be preached, revealing their involvement and intervention in human affairs. In conclusion, in animistic contexts such as Africa, where the fear of evil hangs heavy in the minds and over the heads of even Christian converts and pastors, the church has to be more earnest and diligent to labor to dispel such fears and to deliver those who are held captive to the power of evil. After carefully studying the factors holding the people captive, the strategies outlined involving the 3 encounters of the Christian experience and relevant teaching and proclamation of the gospel in meaningful ways must be done in the hearing of the people. My recommendations are simple. We need an adjustment on the teaching ministries of the church. Whether it is the programs that we have on Wednesday or on Sabbath afternoons, which is a common practice in Eastern and Southern Africa, and which Western Africa should pick up. Sabbath afternoon, what is the subject that you study? Make it relevant. And also when you go to your camp meetings, what do? It's interesting the number of camp meetings that they attended and how we keep recycling the same old messages, America in prophecy, and all those things which are irrelevant to the people. I tried in one of the churches. I went for a wedding sometime in Nigeria. I said, we'll be talking about, is it witchcraft that day? The church was full as if we're having another second service. Prayer conferences and the ministries of the church. We need to organize more prayer conferences and teach people how to pray. The disciples of Jesus, after walking with him for some time, still say, Master, teach us to pray. And there's a small book printed by the General Conference on Prayer by Ellen White, compilation, powerful stuff. Let's read through those things. Let's put them into practice. We need to have more ministerial conferences. I've had the privilege of being invited to a few. We need to have more conferences where we're discussing on these issues that are relevant to the psyche of the people, deliverance from evil, and how to handle fear of witchcraft and all the curses and the ancestors. And that goes to us now. This is speaking to ourselves here. The seminary curriculum. What are the courses that we're taking? What are the quantity of the courses that we're taking, and how relevant are they to the pastor when he gets out there?
Yeah.
We need to adjust that, and that should go even way back to undergrad, not to even talk about here where we are at AUA. We need more relevant courses and classes that deal with this real subject. And then lastly, contextualized resources. And an example of that which we put in your bag is the one on deliverance, dealing with the demonic. That is the first that will be coming out from the missions department here at AUA. The next one we're focusing on is on folk religions. We need to get to the point where we're providing the resources and using those resources, and such as in the class I had with the Doctor of Ministry students in the Discipleship and Biblical Spirituality cohort, contextualized Bible studies. You and I are the ones who must develop those Bible studies to address the contextual challenges that our people are facing. In the next paper I will be presenting later today, we'll be looking at folk religions, discipling people from folk religions, and I'll be making a presentation with Gary Krause present for why we'll have a study center on folk religions. See you later.
Oh, okay.